Hello everyone, happy Thursday. Welcome to our live lesson for Thursday, December 14th. And I'm going to give you some tips, strategies for working with value as we have begun Unit 2 in terms of understanding shade. So, a couple of things I want to draw your attention to as you are working through your grayscales, as you're working through your understanding of highlights and shades in terms of Lesson 2. So I'm kind of combining Unit 2, Lesson 1 and 2 together to kind of help you along with it. So what's really important to know, I guess, I'll start off by saying the idea of your shading pencils. So those have been included for you in your art kits, or if you have your own sort of kits or shading pencils from previous opportunities in art, you're welcome to use those as well. But those are kind of key to understanding the idea that when you're using various pencils and you're establishing the levels of shade, it brings your sort of two-dimensional shapes into form. So the 2D versus the 3D. Now, understanding that in any art course, this takes time. So I know some students can get very, very frustrated right away, and please don't. Allow yourself the opportunity to kind of play around, figure this out, but allow yourself the time it takes to do that. So I will always accommodate due dates and things like that for students that are working through. Remember, you are recording your processes as these things happen and that you work through them. But again, please take your time. So I have an example of something I want to show you. So I'm going to switch screens for a second. Give me 1 second here. There we go. Sorry guys, just sharing my screen. Okay, so what I have done is I've taken, let's just say, the shape of something, and I want to apply this example to your sphere and cube that you are going to be using. So understanding the idea of, first of all, our shading technique. So here you see cross-hatching. You see our lines going definitely, let's say, from one side, and we're crossing back and forth to create this idea of form. Now, one thing I really want to draw your attention to is the idea of going with the shape. So you're going to notice that the shape of this is kind of robust at the bottom to establish the kind of weight of a pear. So as we move away from light, establishing our highlight, as we move away from a light source, you're going to notice that it gets darker right here, as it should, right? So right here we have the use of darker pencils. We have our use of our core shadows right down here. So we understand that this pear is in fact sitting on something. So the idea of our highlights, super important, because highlights identify where the light source is coming from, and that will help you gauge where in fact you go from where your lightest point to your darkest point is. So what you're going to notice is that because our cast shadow is down here, hope you can see this here, it's down here, our lightest point should be up here. So you'll notice that there's more highlights around these areas because that's where the light is in fact coming from. And we have more cross-hatching, more senses of darker tones around this area. And here, of course, we have our darker areas to establish this kind of concave where the stem is for the pear, establishing that sense of depth as well. Okay, so it's really important to establish where the highlight is, and then where it tells us where the cast shadows should be. And then from there, we kind of work inside. Again, establishing those shading techniques, cross-hatching, and then understanding where sort of the highlights should be. So you're going to apply the exact same theory to, of course, your cube and to your sphere as well. So I'm just going to switch my screen here. Sorry, guys. Just trying to get back. There we go. Okay. So understanding too, when we're talking about highlights and cast shadows, like I showed you with the pear, light does not travel in a straight line, right? Light expands. So when you're establishing highlight, understand that light, so if this is our highlight, this is our sun, if you will, our light bulb. So from there, light travels this way, right? Light expands. It doesn't travel in like this like perfectly straight line. So again, when you have your pencil, you're working with your contours, you're working specifically with your shapes and keeping your hands super loose. Don't hold your pencil super tight. Keep your hand loose and you're working with the actual shape of the object of which you are creating. So specifically with these kind of examples or with this practice, I just picked a cube, something more rigid and square versus a sphere, which is again going more in a more circular motion. So really important just in the understanding of that critical thinking skill. Light travels this way, or again, wherever the light's coming from, just understanding that it definitely is not traveling in a straight line, and establishing highlight first really helps to figure out, okay, here's my light, therefore my darkest point is going to be on the opposite side of that object. And that's where your cast shadow is going to be. It's where you're going to use your darkest pencils versus your lightest pencils, where those where the highlight is coming from. So hopefully that sort of helps create some clarity as well. Now, a couple of things that I also want to show you. I know students get really obsessed sometimes with the idea of smudging tools. So you can actually, I'm not against smudging tools, by the way. I think they can be super helpful. I know I have a pack, as you can see right here. So this is a smudging tool. You can buy them at any art store. Actually, I'm pretty sure you can buy them at the dollar store. And basically, it's recycled paper. Looks like that. And essentially, it's paper that's been rolled up, and then you can actually sharpen these. To be honest, I've sharpened mine before. And it's just kind of rolled out to a tip. And basically, you can use smudging tools to help establish, like to kind of blend your tones and your pencil marks, your lines within your object. Here's where I find students get stuck with tools. So you can use a smudging tool, you can use paper towel over your finger and kind of smudge that way. I've seen people do that. I've actually seen students use cotton balls as well, and again kind of going in and sort of smudging areas. All of those things work. The only thing I'm going to beg you to do is do not use your finger. I repeat, do not use your finger. And why? Because our fingers have natural oils. And those oils will get onto your work. To erase that oil, it becomes very messy and not so great in terms of the end result of your image that I promise you will not be happy with. So no fingers. Use cotton balls, wrap your finger in a paper towel, get a smudging tool or something along that line if you want to use that sort of technique of smudging. But where I find students get kind of stuck with smudging is that they over smudge, right? They overdo it, and then in the end, when we look at it, everything looks one tone. So the idea of using multiple pencils to kind of establish going from something two-dimensional to 3D and popping off the page is that you're using, and you can see, multiple tones, and that means multiple pencils. So because we have our sketching pencils, it establishes that idea of going from lightest to darkest. Always lightest to darkest, and for obvious reasons. Going from darkest to light, when you go to erase, it's a mess. So it's super easy to always go darker versus you can't go lighter when we're sketching, right? Same with paints. You can always make something darker, but if you go dark too quick, can't take it off. So same thing with drawing. You're going from your highlight, which is why on your grayscales, I've always said work from your highlight, your white square, and always go dark from there, and you can kind of gauge where that is. So if you do want to use a smudging tool of any kind, that's fine, as long as it's not your fingers, your bare fingers, as well as it's really important not to overdo it. Because if I can't see the different tones in your object or in your images, then that's going to hurt the mark, because that's the whole point, is you got to be able to establish those varying tones. So I'm really hoping that was a bit more helpful in terms of working through your next two worksheets. Your final assignment for Unit 2 will be posted very soon, but right now what I want is for you guys to be focusing on those worksheets, gaining that feedback that I'm going to give you, and then going from there when we start our your big project by tonight or tomorrow. And then of course you have the weekend and you have the beginning of next week as well. So hopefully that's enough time. And if it's not, then just let me know and I'll always work with you and then we'll go from there. So hopefully this is helpful. I've noticed no one popped in today to ask any questions. So I'm going to assume that means you guys are doing okay. If not, please send me an email. And like I said, happy to help, happy to work with you. So hope you guys are having a great day and happy sketching.